Welcome to Hello Kind Soul Podcast, where we raise the vibration of kindness on a global scale. I'm Dr. Ebony Green, your host, and I'm super excited to be with you today. If you want to follow us on all major platforms, look us up at Hello Kind Soul Podcast. And if you want to follow me, look me up at eGreen Equity. I hope you enjoy the episode. Have a great day. Welcome to Hello Kind Soul Podcast. I'm your host, Dr. Ebony Green, and I'm so excited to be in community with you. Today, we're going to just talk about this idea of why do we tear each other down? And when I think about the question itself, it comes to mind just because lately I feel like there's so many different places and spaces I can move and turn and see us kind of going after each other, right? As individuals, as collectives of people, as groups of people. And it never sits well with me. And there's nothing really people can say to make me feel good about seeing the way we dehumanize each other in this world. And whether it's in communication regarding business, whether it's interpersonally, whether it's with family members or friends, what is mind-blowing is that I genuinely believe that this world right now is in need of kindness. Right. And that was always the genesis of this podcast. But this podcast started 2 years ago as a talk. Right. And the reason that I started it was you know what? I'm so exhausted by scrolling and seeing the way we dehumanize each other. And so I think there's a space for us to talk about what are the ways that we have to show up and be kinder, gentler people. Right. And so recently I'm watching, just all the insanity happen in the world and just the way people talk to each other, jump in people's comments, say these things with no real accountability for what is the purpose of judging folks and why are we so comfortable and happy when we're disrespectful to each other in our discourse, right? Recently I had a situation where some folks that I work with, there was really just a miscommunication. And as a result, a project we were working on kind of got a little messed up, right? And so when they shared what was the problem, in that moment, I had a couple options, right? I could be a complete jerk and be really angry and just kind of be dismissive or disrespectful. In that moment, I could be calm and say, okay, cool, what's the mistake? How do we fix it? How do we solve the problem? Or I could have just kind of went off the rails, you're fired, right? Not really, but you know what I'm saying, right? And so here's the piece. The funny part is that I'm not really a person that gets really angry generally, right? And this week has just been a whole week. I've had a bunch of things go awry, and there's been several opportunities where I could have showed up as the older version of me or a version that I just don't respect anymore, right? Or I could show up as the respectable, responsible, kind, compassionate business owner that I really am. But in order to get to that place, there's been a lot of work done in terms of I want people to ultimately feel how I feel. And so if the goal is when I'm interacting with people, I feel a sense of, peace and respect and all of those things. And that's what I'm required to do and how I'm required to show up. The reason I'm sharing that little snippet of a story is that because at the end of the day, what always is the foundation that I really situate myself is how do I want people to always remember me? Right. And maybe that's selfish. I'm not sure, but it matters to me that when I'm no longer in spaces in this world, that I have a legacy that says this person moved through the world in the way that she told and tried to encourage others to move through. She moved through that way and had the ability to communicate with folks. And while sometimes you have conversations with people that bring a little tension, that ultimately the goal is always to get to the other side where we both have mutual respect and we can move on, right? Interestingly enough, the same week, I had another issue with another partner, I would say, in the work that I do. And that person ended up texting me today and, basically was hey, just reaching out, and they shared some information about, and I think it was more of a text of are you actually mad? And so I responded. And it's interesting, if you're watching this podcast, you know who you are, and I appreciate you. And I responded because I had my phone and I saw the text. And what happened in the back of my mind was I think there are people who live in this world that are literally walking with their nerves on the outside of their body. And when I say that, I mean, there are some people that when things happen that don't go their way, they just kind of lose it. And for those of you out there who might be those people, I want you to situate yourself and really think about why, right? What is the trigger that sets you off in a way that then you spiral where you can say or do or act in a way that you would never want your children or anyone else's children to see you act, right? Like, that's where the work situates ourselves. Like, when we talk about what does it mean to be a kind soul, it's what is the work you're prepared to do to be the better version of you? Because if you're not prepared to do the work, then you're going to keep ending up in places where you have to apologize, say sorry, send gifts, or avoid people because your version of showing up angry is really disrespectful and very unnecessary. And I remember the times where I was never like a super explosive person, but I was straight petty. Petty Patty, that was me, right? Like, there were many times where I just was mad all the time. And what I look back and realize is like, it was very rarely them and most often me. And it's not to say that they were right at whatever situation happened, but it is to say we are in charge of our emotions. We can actually control those. You know, I was watching this podcast the other day, and this young person said, shout out to Sleep is for Suckers. And they had someone on, and the woman said, you know, my husband helped me understand that I was actually in charge of my emotions. And I giggled, but the point was she was being dead serious. Like, I'm actually in charge in the way that I show up. I am in charge of how I express my dismay, how I express my sadness, how I express my shock, right? No one else gets to control that but you. But if you're not able and willing to do the work to kind of work through the spaces of like harm and anger and trauma and all those pieces, you potentially can show up and vomit on other people. And so what I'm watching in the world right now all the time is like this projection of like hatred and vitriol and attacking people, whether in the comments or on podcasts or just in the way that people speak to people in the stores. And I think the thing is, I'm just calling on us to be better. Because if our goal is literally to change the world, right? Let's move aside from what people personally believe about how we should change the world. And let's just sit ourselves in the middle of we want to change the world. If your goal is to change the world, then you have to start to think about, how do I want that to come to fruition? Is there something that I can actually do in the way that I'm behaving? And we all fundamentally know kind of what makes people listen to us more rather than less. And I could promise you, saying disrespectful things, devaluing people, attacking people for their race or their gender or their identity, all of that nonsense is never going to get us to a place of a better world, ever. And I said this the other day to someone who I was chatting with. I said, you know, sis, it's so crazy because we could easily turn on the TV, watch the news, scroll on our Instagram, and get filled up with hate real quick. But love will always have a higher vibration than hatred. I promise you that. And so when we get to show up as our kindest self, when we do our best to just embody what those ideals are, which are empathy, compassion, love, care, wholeness, inclusivity, belonging, those values, it feels better. Even with the idea that like there are times where people have to fire people, right? Like I've said this before. The goal is to let people leave still feeling whole and complete. Like, okay, this didn't work out, but that doesn't mean I'm not a good person. It doesn't mean I'm less than. It doesn't mean that I'm like this unredeemable thing that kind of lives. So I think for me, the challenge is like, okay, what do we need to pay attention to kind of think about, you know, how are we behaving? And so the first thing I always say to people is like legitimately, is the way that you're behaving something that you would be proud of your mom watching or your kids watching? Because I will tell you, even as a young person, when I moved through the world and I did things, like I would always know, like if my mom saw me doing this thing, and I'm grown now, but even now, if I use that as like the radar or the modicum of like going left or going right, like if you think about someone you care deeply, right? So let's remove the people I said. You have someone in your life that matters a lot to you, no matter who you are, hopefully. If you don't, that's another podcast, right? But there's someone in your life you care about deeply. Is the way you're behaving, would it be appropriate to them, right? Now, for some of you, you're like, yeah, because they're people who are unhealed too. So we're not going to talk about those people. For the people who can understand that there are the ways of being that I'm showing up in real life that would be problematic to people who care deeply about me and for me, why do we continue to dehumanize each other? See, I feel like there's a piece of that we're getting duped in the world we're living in right now, which basically says like there's a that group and a this group and a this group and a that group. And if all four of those groups refuse to figure out a way to find commonality, then all four of those groups get conquered. And so I've never seen a time in this world like this, ever. And I'm not young, I'm on the older side, but I've been around a long time. And I've never found a place where you could be in conversation with people and the meanest things could come out of their mouth and they think it's funny or appropriate, because it's not funny and it's not appropriate. And it bothers me deeply because what I always end up thinking about, because as you know, my core is an educator, what are the kids going to do? Are the kids okay? Because they're not okay. Because we have children right now in schools running around bullying each other and saying horrible, horrible things and acting in horrible ways. And then we have principals and administrators who have the audacity to suspend those children when the truth of the matter is, unfortunately, our young people are showing up and acting like adults are acting, and only people getting consequences for those behavior are the young people. And so one of the things that really brought me to think about, like, what am I going to talk about on this podcast that I think is really pressing? And so the message was always in the back of my mind, like, I think it's important for us to address just the way people are showing up right now, because it's not cool and it's really harmful and it's really hurtful. But more importantly, like, I literally watched something last week that, it was a board meeting of a school district, and I've never seen anything like it. And while I can watch it probably and, chuckle and crack up about all the insanity that was happening, the truth of the matter is, I'm like, these are all grown adults and there are children that actually have to go to this school district and live a good life. And I think that there's a bunch of parties, not one party, a bunch of parties playing into this problematic behavior. And for those of you who watch my podcast and know what I'm talking about, I'm sure some of you may not be that happy. And I respectfully, I love y'all, but it's a lot of parties that are showing up. And the problematic nature is silence sometimes is the problem and speaking too much is a problem. But when no one is really willing to come and move out of ego and sit down and have a real conversation about what needs to be done and what needs to be said or how we have to engage each other and how we have to speak to each other, when no one's really willing to do that, children suffer and adults suffer and your employees suffer. Everyone suffers. But this fundamental through line of like, when did it become okay to tear each other down consistently and persistently? I'm not really sure. So, I think the reason I enter kids into the chat, right, is because I think our young people don't really know what it means to be kind. And I didn't really connect their behavior to the world we're looking at until maybe a year ago. And I think the reason I was able to do that is because there are these moments where I'm seeing adults who I know are good intentioned people, like, right? They're well-intentioned people. They care deeply about making the world better. And I see even them kind of like doing these weird things in the way that they talk about each other or over fixating themselves on tearing down people behind their back or in the group chat or whatever, right? And then when someone hears what you've said about them, it's like, oh, but, I didn't mean it that way. Well, here's a piece that might be helpful. If I text something, if I write something, if I say something, I have to be mindful that text, that statement, that's what you say could get out. And if it getting out would put you in a bad light, I think we should think about like, well, why are we saying it? And it sounds silly because I want to say this is something they taught us like in second grade, like don't say, not nice stuff or whatever the phrase was, right? But I remember working in my first administration job. Shout out Dr. Hoggard. And I remember him saying to me, always operate like you're being recorded, right? And part of why he said that is because, people say a lot of things in anger or frustration and they don't realize like, when I'm not mad anymore, this is probably not going to age well, right? You see on Twitter, people will say something and someone will put it like, this is not going to age well. Or they bring it up later, a year later. Dr. Green said this didn't age well, right? So, but as he said that to me, I had a different reason. I thought about it differently. But now I think about it in the context of like, as a public figure, would you want someone to publish the unhealed versions of your speech? And the answer is no. But I think there's also something to be said about we can control the things we say and how we treat each other. And the age-old adage, you could just say nothing and pass, does ring true. The question is, we really sometimes feel like I have to have the last word. I have to go back and forth with you. I have to say the meaner thing that's going to be worse than what you said to me. And there is a space for us to walk away, right? There are times where I'm having conversations with people and I can see myself getting more and more elevated, right? I can feel myself getting angry and angrier and angrier. And there's times where I just have to say, listen, I'm going to go now and I'm going to call you later, or I'll talk to you tomorrow, because I know that I ultimately have to live with my actions, 100%. And I also know when I'm no longer angry and I'm no longer mad, I'm going to feel horrible because I probably said something I shouldn't say, or I'm saying something that's meant to hurt someone's feelings. And that doesn't feel good after you're not mad about it, right? The anger is what gives us almost justifies the insanity of it all. So when you're angry and you speak to someone and you say all these mean things, then when you're not mad anymore, you're like, wow, it was really bad. I should have never said that. But now it's too late and I already hurt their feelings and I already ruined the relationship. And now what? But the truth of the matter is, if you're that mad, if you're really that mad, because there are times I'm that mad, my only response is I got to process this and let's talk about it some other time. And then I remove myself. And even if that person can't understand why I'm removing myself, I literally say things like, I'd rather walk away because I'm really upset and I don't have my thoughts fully formed and I don't want to cause more harm, and us circle back to this tomorrow than to engage in this conversation where I'm going to react as opposed to respond. They can like it, they can not, but it allows me to think about how I'm going to frame the conversation, because communication really, really matters. And you genuinely can't get back the things that you said in your anger. And I wonder how many relationships, even marriages, are destroyed because when people get angry, they say the most egregious things. And part of, I think, the moments where they're fighting back and forth is because they love each other so much. But if we really boil down, what does love look like, mean like, sound like? Love is not me dehumanizing, right? People. Love can be, I love you so much and I'm so angry, I'm not going to engage in this conversation right now. But love shouldn't be, I said that because I'm so passionate about how much I love you and you made me so mad. That's crazy. That sounds ridiculous. That is not true. You said the thing you said because you didn't take a moment to process and take a pause. And don't get me wrong, a lot of us grew up that way, right? We've grew up in communities or grown up in relationships where when we're angry, we just unleash this fire. And then later we'd be like, well, I'm sorry, or let's talk later. I'm just saying to us, we all know what pain feels like. I've said that phrase 1,000 times. So if I know what pain feels like, my goal in life is never to recreate the pain in someone else's experience. That's the assignment. Right now, this week, everybody's saying, the assignment, you know what my assignment is? To recognize what pain has done in my life and how that feels. And to live my life in a way that I never, ever, ever, ever recreate that level of pain in someone else's heart. And because at some point in my life, I've caused a bunch of pain, I'm going to do my best every day to breathe life into people in a way that's positive. And even in the example of something getting messed up or having an exchange with people I work with or a problem happening that can't be solved, I'm never going to cause a level of pain in their heart. I'm going to talk about it. We're going to work through the problem. We might even disagree on the solution, but I'm going to always maintain a level of respect for them, because what brings us together is a mutual vision to do great things in the world. Now, even in that regard, there are times we're going to make mistakes, but we're never, ever, ever going to treat each other in a manner that dehumanizes us, because that, my friend, is the most unproductive way to achieve any goal we have. So I just want to let you folks know a couple things. If you're a person who's running around and you're mean-spirited and you're saying mean things and you're doing mean things and your actions are one that is dehumanizing to people or disrespectful to people, ask yourself, why are you doing that? Because I'm going to posit that deep within your heart somewhere, it's actually a reflection of how you feel about you and less about how you feel about them. And so the work has to start with you. You have to decide you want to live different. 2, if you understand what pain feels like, loss feels like, hurt feels like, someone disrespecting you feels like, I'm asking you to think about, is there a way that as you live your life, you can do your best not to recreate harm or hurt or pain that has happened to you and others? And 3, if you really struggle to demonstrate and show people you love them, is there a place in your life that you need to work on being loved? Is there something that's happening in your heart or in your mind or in your experience that somehow you believe you're not worthy of love? And so you really struggle to give that love out to other people. Either way, I genuinely believe that every human being has the capacity to be a kind soul. There are different reasons why we choose not to be. But the fundamental thought that I have, and I genuinely believe, is we all have the ability to raise the vibration of kindness in this world. And it is up to you and I to have these conversations and to think about, what do I need to do to be a better person? I hope you have an amazing week, kind soul, and I will talk to you soon. Take care.